So I really want to extend a warm thank you and welcome to Jim Arabito and his camera crew. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good evening, my young brothers and sisters in Angwin. You know, I've been around this hill for 21 years. I'm kind of one of the old men of the mountain. I've seen presidents of this college come and go, business managers come and go, and of course students come and go, grow up and get married and have kids, and I have a 20-year-old myself. So I'll tell you, from the time that I was a student here, I've watched the gray hairs begin to form on my temples, and I've began to see the wrinkles form around my eyes. When I was younger, I thought I'd live forever, but I found out that we're dying while we're on our feet, and time goes by very fast. I was an extremely shy student when I was here at PUC. Lived in the village because most of the students couldn't live in the dorm. We had 2,600 students back then, and of course the student body is much smaller today. And we didn't have the extra dormitories. In the dormitories the old dormitories, they had sometimes 4 and even up to 6 students in a room back then. So I really come from the old days. Not only that, I took commercial art here, and my teacher back then gave the wildest art survey class you could ever imagine. In that class, he traced the history of art through a study of the history of religious symbolism through the centuries. And if you were back at that time, during the late 1960s, you would have seen a program in art history class similar to the program that I'm going to show you tonight. And so I'd like for you to just think back to a time when students would observe something of this in art history class rather than just thumbing through books, secular books on the history of art. I feel very strongly about the subject that I'm presenting. One reason is I feel that over the last 20 years that I've been able to observe, I've seen more and more worldliness coming in among us. And yet I feel like the coming of Christ is closer than it's ever been before. And it causes me deep and personal concern. And I would like to see a real movement take place among the young people today. You know, I was told that our hope for the future is the young people today. And I'm watching and I'm waiting for something to happen among them. Now this time of year there's a temptation in Adventist families to enjoy something of the holiday of Halloween. But very few Adventists really know the history and the origin of Halloween. And I want to share that with you tonight because it reveals to us something of why the world is in the condition that it's in today. It's a very significant study. First of all, as you go into the stores today, you're going to notice some very interesting things. You're going to see smiling pumpkins. And if you go out on October the 21st, you're going to notice thousands of people, not children, but thousands of adults going into the city streets of Chicago and New York and some of our big cities. This thing called Halloween has gone past just being a children's holiday. It's become an adult holiday. And if you go out to Lake Merritt or some of the large parks, you're going to see a congregation of witches. And it's a very interesting thing that something that used to be something that was hidden has now become very open. Halloween is now called the witches' holiday. And that's what it was called in medieval Scotland. It was called the Witches' Day. And at that time, they used to burn all the black cats they could find, thinking that witches turned into cats. But nowadays, no one burns witches anymore. And so they flaunt themselves openly. I have an ad here from the Oakland Tribune from a number of years ago where it advertised that witches would be out in their boats on November the 1st celebrating Halloween, and they would be in dragon boats dressed as ghosts and for the public to come out and see. What's happening now is something that is really rooted in the ancient worship of the dead is becoming one of the greatest American holidays. If you go to the stores today, you're going to see all kinds of candy in preparation for part of that holiday where children go to the door and they say trick or treat. And if you don't give them a candy, supposedly you'll receive a trick. and I'm glad that the tricks aren't very active anymore, but the treats are plentiful. But notice that the majority of the children are going to dress up in hideous costumes. Things like ghosts and wizards and witches and things like that. And this gives us an evidence of where this thing came from. It was at one time when people believed very strongly in the immortality of the soul, and all of the festivals revolved around that teaching. Take, for instance, if you go to Rome today, the archaeological museum there, you'll find this old sarcophagus, or a grave of a dead Roman, probably a wealthy family. But notice carefully the symbolism involved here. You'll see a deity carrying over her shoulder a child. And then if you look down below her, you'll notice that this deity is riding in a chariot, and it's being pulled by 2 winged serpents. Evidently, that sarcophagus once contained 2 children that had died. And the Roman belief was that these children's souls would be carried to the other world by winged serpents. Now you tell me, where did the winged serpent come from? The only place that you can find a winged serpent is found in the description of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And it was a winged serpent. And it was giving life to Eve by her partaking of or eating that fruit and believing its teachings. If you go into the old teachings of witchcraft, even beyond the time of Christ, you'll find that the old shamans or the witch doctors would direct the people to dress in certain ways or to paint up their faces in certain ways. These witch doctors or shamans would see in a vision or in a dream or a manifestation while they were under a drug hypnotic trance, a demon or a spirit. And then they would direct the people to put makeup on or wear jewelry like, or put masks on or costumes like these spirits in order to gain the power or the energy that those spirits had to offer. These people also believed that within the trees and within the plants were spirits in nature, and there was constant round of ceremonies and rituals that revolved around constant placation of the dead all the way around. God had to reject the children of Israel because they joined in the land of Canaan with the inhabitants there in their worship of the dead. And it came to the point where they were even offering their children as human sacrifices, their sons and their daughters offered to the god Moloch by fire. You see, it was an intrinsic part of ancient astrological worship that the sun had to be reclothed with life and energy and human flesh in order to start its approach into the new year again. And so around that time of year, as the sun began to slow down in its circle, human sacrifices became the order of the day. But it was also the other way around. People believed that they had to eat God to get his divine or spiritual power inside of them. We think of cannibalism just as being something that is such a degenerate form of society that they'll go so far as to eat one another. But not so. These tribes, even the primitive tribes, were guided by ancient cult practices. And when they ate the bodies of the dead, they ate only certain portions of that body that would tend to give them spiritual power and spiritual energy. Also, they ate portions of animals or offered animals and human beings as a way of appeasing the gods of nature. You see, the ancients didn't believe that they had to worship a good God, but they believed that they had to constantly placate a God that could destroy him. And in every culture of the world, we see this communion with God through sacrifice and eating of the body. Now, in Athens, one of the most important services was taking place at the Acropolis there. Here, once a year, there was a sacred sacrifice, and they ate the body of the bull. The way it was carried out is young men carrying a special ceremonial axe would lead 3 bulls up onto the altar. There they would place 3 round cakes representing the supernatural power of the sun or the forces of nature. As they set that on the altar, these bulls would make their way to that, eat that cake. And the moment they ate it, that axe would come down on their heads and they would fall senseless to the ground. Immediately their skins were ripped from their bodies, and the populace was urged to come up there and tear the flesh from the bodies of these bulls while the animal was still alive and quivering. In eating the fresh blood and the fresh flesh of the animal, they were receiving, they believed, the fertilizing power of the God of nature inside of them. And those cakes had transferred to the bull and then into them. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? But the whole goal in the occult has ever been to get the forces of nature or the power of God inside of you so that you would become a spirit medium. That's all revolved around the worship of the dead, because they believed that even God himself was once a being that had died and ascended. The world of the dead in Babylon was ruled over by a woman by the name of Lilith. She was the goddess of the night. And you see in this picture beside her 2 owls symbolizing the spirits of the dead. She has wings, so she represents the spirits of the dead. So the woman not only represented evil in the old world, and she represented the spirit world, but the woman also came to represent not only the god of death, but also the God that gives life. And the woman was symbolized in the occult as the author or the mother of the sun, the queen of heaven, or the mother of God. And this is one reason why a virgin, a young virgin, was the most valuable or one of the most valuable sacrifices to be offered to the gods. Here you see in the river Nile this young woman being offered as a human sacrifice to the Nile River. But what about that horned deity that we see, especially at this time of year at Halloween? Well, you'll find that the Bible does not talk about a devil that has horns, does it? No, it doesn't. The fact was that the sun was believed to be like the fertilizing power of the bull. And so the sun god, the creator to the occult world or the pagan world, was seen as a god with horns. The creatures or the male animal that could fertilize an entire herd was worshipped because, as a symbol of the creator, because so much life force came from him. Another precious symbol in the occult was the hand. Many of you have probably seen this symbol before. 3 upraised fingers was also the symbol of the sun god and all the forces of nature. And these things have come into play right on down to today. The ancient pagan gods, wanting to represent that now they were in union with the power of the sun and held that power in their hands, held what was called a crozier, or a wand, or a lightning bolt, symbolizing that they controlled the forces of nature. And that wand has come down to us today. In those pagan temples, those priests studied deep into the practices of the occult. Many terrible rites were carried out in an effort to dim or dull the mind so that the spiritual forces could take over. In one of the rituals, these people were placed in the heart of the pyramid in the king's chamber, placed in a sarcophagus, and in that particular initiation, it was believed that there where the concentration of energy was, the soul could separate from the body, shoot right up through the top of the pyramid, make contact with the stars, which they believed was the departed spirits of the dead, be purified and come back into the body. And you'll see this idea of death, union with the spirit world, and rebirth over and over again in the occult world. These priests then became the mediums between the people and the invisible forces of the dead. And that was the basis of all occult religion and priestcraft that later developed in the world. When a man who was a priest, who had been connected with the world of the dead or the spirits died, a piece of his body or his body was buried, and a little temple was built over him. In Buddhism today, if you go through the mountains of the Himalayas and the mountains of India and Pakistan, you find little temples all along the roads, or stupas. But if you go throughout the world, you'll see these temples. Now also you'll find that down to today, there are temples in this world that still have a modern priests and pieces of their body embedded in the altar. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But this very form of religion, the worship of the dead, in the Celtic world was under the control of a group of priests called the Druids, or the Men of the Oak. They worshipped a monotheistic God, but they believed that this God had 2 forms. He was the sun god, yes, his name was Hu, but he also had a female deity associated with him named Sheradwen. These Druid priests were a powerful lot of people. They were extremely intelligent. They had universities and colleges throughout the Isles of Britain. In their schools, they became poets and historians and great educators, and they kept the people under their control. The Druid priest that you see in this picture has on his chest a breastplate called the breastplate of judgment. And behind his head, if one of you would be so kind as to focus that That projector, I'd certainly appreciate. No, that won't focus it. It's up on the top. There you go. If you'll notice, on top of his head, he wears a tiara. Thank you. That tiara represented the sun. It was made of rays of the sun. These men believed that their arch-druid was in fact a pope, a priest-king, who ruled just as the Pope of Rome rules, but in the Celtic world. Now, the Celts were established in groups all the way from Mongolia across the globe, through the Greek world, all the way over in Northern Europe, and their headquarters was, of course, in the British Isles. So Druidism was well meshed in with the nations of the world. Now, they had four special festivals each year, but the most important festival was to the god Samhain. This was the lord of the underworld, or the lord of the dead, the lord of souls. Now, these priests were interesting characters. Their Celtic warriors fought the Romans, and they would capture the prisoners, and they would take these prisoners, and at certain times of year, they would set up bonfires to burn these escaped slaves and Romans to death. It took place basically on this time of the year. It was on November the 1st, and their November the 1st began at evening. Now, at that time, all of the Druid, or the Celtic people, would put out the fires in their hearths, and there would be a complete blackout in the Celtic world. And then they would go up on the hills, and there they would light great big bonfires. These bonfires were used for human sacrifice and for animal sacrifice, in order that the placation of the god and the union of the soul with the fire ascending into the heavens would create a sanctifying eternal fire. Now, the word bonfire comes from the word bone fire, and it meant to burn human bones. When you go to the beach next time and you decide to all have a party around a bonfire, think of that for a minute. But when the various Celtic people would finish, all the communities would go up there. They believed that on that night, that the souls of the dead would now be transferred. All that died that year would be transferred to the other world. And the other world in their mind was not hell. These people loved their dead ancestors and their dead relatives. That night, those bonfires were to aid them on their way to the other world. And when the fire died down in the morning, and they took coals from that, and they would put that in gouged out turnips and different types of fruits, beets, and they would carry those little lamps back down to their hearth and light their hearth again for the new year. This was the Celtic New Year. But also there were evil spirits out at that night, and there was a fear of these spirits, so they placed food out for these spirits so as not to cause them to receive an evil spell. And that's the origin of trick or treat. It's the concept that if the spirits aren't satisfied, evil will befall you. Now, when the Celtic missionaries, who had been evangelized originally by the apostles, came in contact with Druidism and the Celtic religions, they won a tremendous victory. And rapidly the news of the gospel spread across the world among the Celtic societies. Marvelous schools were set up on the British Isles, and in these schools the chief education was in the languages of the Bible. 18 years of study. And these folks had to learn it well, because when they left those schools, they left as missionaries, friends. And they knew Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And some of these monks used up to 70 different alphabets for different purposes. It was a land of scholars and geniuses, and they banished Druidism. They banished it where they had an influence. But there were still centers of Celtic paganism. This picture here is a picture of the island of Iona that you read about in the Great Controversy. From there, the knowledge of the Sabbath and the truth of Christ went out for 625 years to the nations of Europe. This early religion changed the Celtic world completely. And God raised up a champion for them at the time that the Roman Church and the Anglo-Saxons were trying to destroy them. This is in Glastonbury Tor in Wales. It's all that's left of King Arthur's castle today. God raised up Arthur, a tribal ruler, and he defeated the Anglo-Saxons in 12 successive battles. And during the time that he defended the Sabbath-keeping Celtic church, It was the greatest period of their growth. And just to show you something of the high culture that was developed because of the study of the Bible among the Celts, this book was found on one of their holy islands off the coast of Newcastle called Lindisfarne. It's called the Lindisfarne Gospels, and it's one of the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts that men have ever seen. And this manuscript here was found, originally they believe it was written on the island of Iona. It's called the Book of Kells. It's on display in Trinity College in Dublin. And this book here is the most beautiful manuscript that's ever been produced by human hands. And it was written in the Old Itala version, which is the same as your King James Bible is today. Now, this map shows you the movements of the Celts. Can you see that the darker colored islands are the islands of Britain? And as you see the lines or the arrows coming down, you'll notice them coming right down and across Europe. In the 6th and 7th century, missionaries from Ireland and Wales came down across Europe. They built schools, colleges, every branch of knowledge known in their day was found in those libraries, and the greatest minds of Europe were educated in these schools. The Celts brought back civilization to Europe after degenerating into barbarism and laid the foundation for the Renaissance and the Reformation. We owe Western civilization to those Sabbath-keeping Celtic or British Christians. But there was another form of Christianity that was vying for the minds of the pagan world. It originated around the Mediterranean, especially in Alexandria, Egypt, and Rome. It was a union of paganism and Christianity, and it completely distorted the gospel to the nations. It taught that men united in their priestcraft with the supposedly supernatural initiations could become representatives of God on earth. And from the ranks of this priestcraft of a form of Gnosticism, we later called Catholicism, there arose men who claimed to be God himself on earth. Look at this quotation from the book by St. Alphonsus de Liguori. The power of the priest is the power of the divine person, for the transubstantiation of the bread requires as much power as the creator of the world. Thus, the priest may be called the creator of his creator. Innocent III has written, "Indeed, it is not too much to say that in view of the sublimity of their offices, the priests are so many gods." These people actually believed that they had the right and the authority not only to destroy primitive Christianity and absorb it, but to go into the pagan world and absorb that and sanctify it. Look at this quotation. It says, "The Lord our God no longer reigns. He's resigned all power and authority to the Pope." That's Archbishop of Mainz. What blasphemy! We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty, Pope Leo VIII. You'll see that again in the judgment, I'm sure. In the Fifth Lateran Council, addressing the Pope, Christopher Marcellus said, "For thou art the shepherd, thou art the physician, thou art the director, thou art the husbandman, finally thou art another God on earth." The amazing blindness of the Dark Ages. And you know how they eventually took over the Celtic world? Pope Gregory, or Gregory the Great, Gregory the First, in 601 announced to the missionaries of the Catholic Church that they were no longer to destroy anything that was pagan. If the pagans worshipped an idol or a tree, then the Catholic monks were to go in and sanctify it in the name of Christ and use it and absorb it into the church. In this way, many of the pagan gods were in fact sainted and are worshipped as saints in the church today, and many pagan rites have come into the church. Look at this quotation. This came from the 17th century, 1667. It says, "They allowed their proselyted Christians to commit idolatry by a subtle evasion, that of enjoining them to hide under their clothes an image of Jesus Christ, to which they teach them by mental reservation to direct those public adorations which they render the idol." So these people are actually still pagans, just using the name of Christ. And this was written in the 20th century about the way that the Roman Church works to take over her enemies, and it's the last phase. It says, forming an alliance with it, characterized by joining it, especially in circumstances leading it, the aims of her seeming surrender being to slow down, capture, and paralyze the enemy. Ellen White said in Great Controversy, "It is a part of her policy to assume the character which will best accomplish her purpose." And that's exactly what happened when she came in contact with the occult. Many many of the great historians have noticed this, even Roman Catholic historians. This is written by Wiley. Popery is the gospel transubstantiated into the flesh and blood of paganism. When you go into the great cathedrals of the world, you're going into edifices that have been built exactly after the ancient pagan temples of antiquity. And if you go beneath those churches, as I have done, you'll see bones of the dead. You'll see graves of the dead. Because Romanism is nothing more than the continuation of the worship of demons, which was the old word for the dead. Now, if you go up into the church, you'll find that every sanctuary cannot be sanctified or used until it has a piece of a body or clothing or some relic of a saint, a dead person. And so even the worship that's directed towards heaven is done to the dead. Everywhere you look in those churches, you'll see graves and coffins. And if you go beneath St. Peter's Basilica today, you'll see the graves of the Pope stretched out there for people to kiss and to weep over and adore, as if those men are still alive today. But the most hideous aspect of this situation is the fact that young women are encouraged to give up all of their wealth to the church and then take a vow of silence to go down into cloistered convents and there suffer and pray for and eventually die for the souls that are in purgatory. And this never hit me so hard as when I was in Lausanne, Switzerland, in the cathedral there, and saw this great door in the floor. And when I realized what it was, I tried desperately to open it. There were women down there, some who had never spoken a word or heard another human voice. And those young ladies beneath the floor, many of them die atheists because their prayers are never answered. But there are thousands of young women today who are locked away in this satanic and dreadful system. Here you see a picture of two things. The picture on the top is a young lady touching the foot of Peter in St. Peter's Basilica. The picture below it is a picture of that foot as it has been kissed and kissed and kissed for 2,000 years, until the toes are just worn off. That statue used to be the statue of Jupiter in the Pantheon, and now they call it Peter, and they've put it there. But one of the most hideous things about Romanism today is the Mass. The Mass is not the Christian communion, not even in the slightest way. The Mass is a continuation of the eating of the flesh of God, or cannibalism, that was in existence in the old world. Now, the croziers that you see in the Catholic Church are, in fact, the continuation of the old lightning bolt, or the old crozier, or magic wand. And what about the worship of Mother? Go back to the worship of Isis, the Queen of Heaven. She says, I, Isis, am all that it is or ever has been. The fruit that I have brought forth is the Son in the occult world. She is depicted as a Madonna with a child, just as Hu of the Druids was pictured with, Sarah Dwayne and Hu was pictured as a Madonna and a child. In every culture of the world, the Madonna and the child was worshipped. And this is in St. Peter's Basilica. It is a Madonna figure. And if you look at the baby in her arms, you'll notice that it's the Son. There's no question here about Romanism, but when you go into the history of how she took over both paganism and the primitive church, it's a history of the most horrible scenes that have ever come before the eyes of mortal man. Within the church itself, the rites of the occult continue to be practiced. These people knew nothing about body physiology. They really knew nothing about the sciences of nature. But they continued the rites of paganism that were rife within their area, having adopted it into the Roman system. And we'll find that much of what we call witchcraft today was not only conceived, but perpetuated within the monasteries and the cloisters of Europe. Now, in this book, in your library here in the vault, it's called Ignatian Fireworks of the Fiery Jesuits. It makes a statement about some of the beliefs of these, the most elite of the Roman Catholic priests. Now look at this. I believe in two gods. And to shorten this, the two gods are a mother and a father. And at the end of it, he points out that each of these is a hermaphrodite, or that each one of them is sexually both male and female. Again, from the same book, they affirm that the diligence of an expert conjurer in diabolical arts may be well thought worthy of reward, and that a fortune teller is not obliged to restitution if he hath consulted the devil, nor to confession, though he hath expressly invocated the devil, and that it is lawful to consult a conjurer. This indicates that the church was not against the diabolical arts, but only as they were exercised outside of her authority. The Pope claims to be God of heaven, earth, and hell, even to this day. Now, this is an early depiction of a Christian saint, and he is having a problem with the devil, but he overcame him by the magical powers of Mary. And you'll find that even today in the church, it is rife with miracles and magic and ancient rites that came from pagan idolatry. For example, one area of the church, one of the most elite orders in history, was the Knights Templars. They were there to protect the pilgrims into the Middle East. While they were in the Middle East, they came in contact with the conjurers and the magicians of that part of the world and united the religion of Catholicism in that part of the world with the religion of the occult Kabbalah of the Jews in the Arab Empire. Now, this formed a religion secretly in the Knights Templars where they adopted the dualism of the East, that God is both good and evil. And this is the image that the Knights Templars in the Roman Catholic Church kissed as they broke the cross and threw it across the floor. It laid a foundation for modern witchcraft today, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to get back to Halloween. Give me a break here. Give me a chance. This image is a hermaphrodite deity. It was created not so much by paganism, but by the Templars of Romanism. It was called the goat of the Baphomet. Now, when they were persecuted in the 13th century because the church wanted the wealth that the Templars had developed, they fled into, of all places, Scotland. And there they merged their interests with the Druidic priests and the inoperative Masonry and formed what we know of today as Masonry. It was originally a Roman Catholic institution. It has always been used by them. The highest orders were formed by the Jesuit priests of Rome. But look at this one here. This is another example of the human of paganism and Catholicism. Voodoo today is a very interesting phenomenon. Many, if not most of these people are Roman Catholics. And in the evening, they carry out their occult practices. It is a union between Catholicism and paganism. And the word voodoo comes from the word Waldense, which is the Italian word for the people of the valleys. In French, they were called the Vaudois. And from the word Vaudois, the Roman Church placed upon these people the word voodoo. And those Vaudois, Albigenses, and Waldenses were Sabbath-keeping Christians. Now I've given you a little background in Catholicism and shown you that there is a harmony between paganism and Christianity, and this is its plan for taking over the world. But when they came in contact with the Celts, then they took that religion of the Druids, the Druidic priestesses, which were women that were hired for oracles foretelling the future, were sent away from society. The Druid priests were kicked out of society, and these men were considered to, and women were considered to be the witches and the warlocks and the wizards. And the hell, the Roman hell, the Roman Catholic hell, was then superimposed over the other world of the Celtic religion. The idea of the gods of the spirits of nature weren't done away with in the Roman Church, but they were belittled to the place of fairies and leprechauns and pukas in the Celtic system. But what about the dead relatives, the ancestor worship in the saints? Well, the Roman Church wanted to do away with the worship of Samhain on November the 1st. And so they developed a new day of festival that was called All Hallows Day. The word hallows means sanctified, and it means All Saints' Day. And today, Halloween has been sanctified and is All Saints' Day in the Roman Catholic system. And they believe that on that day, that the Catholics are to honor all those who are dead, who have gone to heaven as saints, and pray to them. But the Celtic populace was not happy with this, and they wanted something closer to their former religion. So the church, again, in order to absorb the Celtic religion, created another holiday and called it All Souls' Day. And on that day, then the people are to pray for the souls of those who are in hell. And this added a tremendous amount of money to the church, because the church was already developing the process of paying for indulgences and paying for sacraments, and now the people had to set out gifts for those priests that wandered the streets on All Hallows Eve, or the evening of Halloween, or All Saints' Day, and give them money and gifts so that they could purchase their prayers for their dead relatives and friends in purgatories. The power of the Roman Church was in the concept of hell, and only the priest could be the minister of that. And the lighting of candles and the lighting of these these lamps is symbolic of the spirits of the dead. Take, for instance, the Catholic Celtic story of how the jack-o'-lantern came into existence. There was once a man named Jack, says the Roman Catholic story, who made a pact with the devil to become the master of masters in the art of being a blacksmith. Because of his pride, Jesus and Peter came and visited him. And they tried to dissuade him from this pact, but he paid no attention to him, and Peter gave him 3 wishes, hoping he would wish the right wish. Well, he said, if I trick someone into a tree, I want him to stay there. If I trick that person into a chair, I want him to stay there. If I trick him into my purse, he has to stay there. When the devil came back after the 7 years that was determined on the pact for his soul, we find that he was tricked by Jack into the tree, and then into the chair, and then into his purse, and only allowed to be released on promise Jack would get another 7 years. This happened 3 times until the devil was scared to death of Jack and went back to hell. When Jack died, he supposedly went to heaven. But Peter said, no, you didn't choose heaven in your 3 wishes. Get out of here. You can't go into heaven. So Jack goes down to the other place. And while he's down there, the devil sees him coming and is scared to death of Jack. So he starts to have the demons lock up all the doors of hell to keep Jack out of it. But Jack was munching on a turnip about that time, one of the favorite foods about this time of year, you see. And just before he went, he scooped up a coal from hell. Some say it was flung at him from the devil, but you know, without being there, you don't know the truth of these stories. And he put it in his turnip. And he carried that turnip with him, and he wanders the world today with his jack-o'-lantern. Now, in America, it became a pumpkin. But the fact is that smiling jack-o'-lantern is a spirit of the dead and part of the ancient worship of the dead, and Jack is waiting for that judgment day. But where did witches come from, friends? And this is the most solemn part of this. Many people teach that witchcraft didn't arise until the middle of the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. Who were they? Well, some say they were just young ladies that were good in the arts of herbs and potions, and as they grew older, they carried out magical rites that were traditional among their cultures, and they would get paid by the families in a community to carry out these services, everything from making love potions and getting people together to various healing things. But the Roman Church wanted to do away with all alternative practitioners to her own priests, and these people were outlawed in society. The aura of witchcraft hung over Europe supposedly for many years, but in the 13th century, with the establishment of the Inquisition, something else took place. At that time, God's people, those people who observed the true Sabbath, who hallowed Christ as the only mediator between God and man, and who believed in the entire Bible, were spreading so rapidly through Europe that they could not be stopped. It was at this time that the Inquisition was set up, and I want to tell you some horrible things took place. These people who loved the Word of God and separated from society in order to worship Him in the way that they felt the Bible dictated they were branded as witches, wizards, warlocks, and worshipers of Satan. And because they met in a cave or in a dell or in the mountains, it was considered that they were carrying out witchcraft Sabbaths. And so this place, Carcassonne, in southern France, which was established for the destruction of the primitive church, carried out a systematic work of torture to force confessions out of these people to make it appear that they really believed these things. These were all written down and have become historical records. The Inquisition was a terrible engine of brainwashing, not only on the people who were tortured and forced into confessions, but on the populace outside, and has left a coloring over the whole Middle Ages. In this way, it was made to appear that the Bible-believing people offered their own children as human sacrifices and carried out terrible rites before the devil. This beautiful picture of a cave scene shows the papal soldiers under the Duke of Savoy coming in and destroying a worship service among these Bible-believing Christians. But the most horrible record of all is here. This is Albi, the beautiful city in southern France that the Waldenses were named after in that part of the world, Albigenses. The Albigenses were the object of the greatest Roman Catholic crusade, and around this city, Béziers in southern France, 1 million of them were destroyed. Some escaped. Some tried desperately to hold out, and they held out to the last here in Montségur, south of Toulouse, until every last one of them was taken by the papal soldiers and tortured to death. That was the lot of God's people. And this is the history that God is telling us that we are to study because we are to face this history in the near future. Satanism today is a hybrid of Roman Catholicism. She is the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Today, thousands and thousands are going into the occult so fast. They don't know about Jesus. They don't know about the power to live a happy and full life. And they're looking for spiritual fulfillment in the occult. Little children are being raised up for the purpose only, many times, of bloodletting and being used as human sacrifices. Little children are being forced to eat the bodies of their playmates that they have been forced to kill. Friends, we have little idea of what's going on behind the scenes. There's almost 4 million children disappeared in this country, and a large number of them have been taken away for human sacrifice. I was watching a panel discussion on this once, and they asked the special force policeman, how common is this today? He says it's on every street. It's in every town. He says it's everywhere today. It's the fastest growing movement. I'll tell you, Halloween is no innocent celebration, friends. This book written, Trip into the Supernatural, was written by a man by the name of Montague. His name was Roger Montague, and he tells us of the elite system behind all witchcraft and Satanism. It is the worship of Satan himself as a beautiful being, and there was a picture on the wall in the worship room, and he was a beautiful being, not the horn god that was created by Catholicism, but a beautiful being. And he was so happy that the people today are deceived in the horned hoof theory, which took place through the Roman Church, because it is necessary that people do not take demons and the devil seriously in the world so that the demon worshipers can rule this world in the decades to come. He became extremely serious. He said that the spirits loved to create ways to bring people into spirit worship. And he also went on to say, it's not in this quote, but on the next page of this book, and you can get this at the Book and Bible House, that anyone that did not align himself with Christ would automatically become part of Satan's kingdom. You can see it today. You can hear it over the radio. You can see it on television, and everything around us. The world is coming in. And in it all, Satan is mocking and laughing at those people who God raised up to unveil the inroads of spiritualism and the rapid growth of papal power. Satan can do these things because he knows we won't do anything, because we're important, because we don't even believe the Word of God and go forth in the power of the Spirit. This record here, made by Black Sabbath, a group of young people that came from Loma Linda. They were Seventh-day Adventist boys. And when you look at their records or hear the lyrics, you sense the Adventist background in these young men. This is one of their records, and it is laughing at you and I today. It is 3 overweight, middle-aged women, the 3 angels. And they're sitting down not doing anything, the Laodicean condition. And they're playing cards and smoking cigarettes. They're part of the world today. I hate this. I hate the world and the devil laughing at us because of our impotence. The papacy is rising today, and God has said he has called his people and given them a message to bear. He has called them to expose the wickedness of the man of sin. And who's exposing his wickedness today? Nobody. Very few are concerned. We're in the midst of a war. We are the remnant of the church of God through the ages. And at the end of time, Revelation tells us we'll be in a war against the devil. The signs are all around us today, dear friends. There is very little time left. You may not live to be as old as I am, because I don't believe there's another decade on this world. If you use this college in your studies for anything, use it, friends, to prepare yourself for missionary work and to join the greatest work that God has ever given to man. And that is to give the final warning message now at the end of time. And give up the frivolity. And give up the foolishness of this world. Thank you so much.